Your vigor or fatigue is something that's always affected in every battle all of the time, yet I'll bet you barely ever think about it. So let's think about it and see what we can learn, and I'll tell you why Perfect Vigor is the strongest ability in the game. Now in Total War Warhammer, your tiredness is called your vigor, but that's a bit of an ambiguous word. For example, in Elden Ring, your vigor is your health or HP. So for clarity, I'm just going to refer to vigor as fatigue for most of this video. Now as you probably know, fatigue goes through these stages: fresh, active, winded, tired, very tired, and exhausted. And these are all the undead equivalent names, by the way. So as your units do stuff, running, fighting, reloading, whatever, they will inevitably reach the exhausted state where all of these debuffs will befall them. And that's quite a lot. Take it in for a second. That's a lot of stuff, a lot of penalties to your unit simply for being tired. The big one, 30 melee attack, that's a pretty huge loss to any unit. So that's where most of your units are going to end up, but it's not just suddenly plonked on them. It is a gradual effect that ramps up as you go through the stages of fatigue. As you can see here, every stage there's a new penalty or two added, and the existing penalties are ramped up. So that's how it works, that's the numbers. If you want to see it, there it is. But for the most part, we don't need to worry about this, except for the exhausted numbers. Keep these in your head to remind you of the severity of getting tired and exhausted. And because we're going to talk about them more later. Now let's start by trying to answer a basic battlefield question. Should we walk our units over to the enemy army at the start of a battle, or is it okay to run them? Is it causing too much fatigue? Well, to answer this question, we first have to understand fatigue a little deeper, so here you go. Make sense now? No? Oh, for goodness sake. Have I got to do everything? These numbers represent the thresholds of fatigue. As you gather up more fatigue through more in-battle actions, your unit naturally will get more and more tired up to exhaustion, which does eventually max out, which is where you'll roll down from when your unit rests. So how exactly are these numbers measured? Well, prepare for math, it's nerd time. Battles in Total War are measured in what's called ticks. Now these last for about 0.1 second of real world time. So quite simply, we can equate that 10 of these at 0.1 second will add up to 1 second of real world time. You still with me? Let's keep going. Let's take the age-old act of running. Running will cost you 4 fatigue per tick. So a bit of simple math, 10 ticks in a second, so that's 4 times 10, that's 40. Let's times that by 60 to represent 1 minute of real-world time, and we can learn that 1 minute of running is going to cost us about 2,400 fatigue. And if we look back at the thresholds, we can see that if we're completely fresh and we run for 1 minute, that's going to put us nearly into active. Although the chances are it probably will, because there's actually a multiplier for running up inclines. Whether that's a hill, a slope, a ramp, it's going to cost you more fatigue to run up hills, just like in real life. And there are different multipliers for a shallow incline, a steep incline, and a very steep incline. And respectively, it will cost you a little bit less fatigue running downhill, I believe. What about good old combat then, throwing down and fighting with the enemy? Well, combat will cost you 19 fatigue per tick. So again, let's get nerdy. 19 per tick, that's 190 per second. Times that over a minute, that's 11,400 fatigue for 1 minute of combat. That's over a third of your fatigue gone just for that 1 minute of combat. So about 2.5 to 3 minutes is about as long as units can fight for before they get exhausted. Assuming they didn't do any running first, of course. So with that, you understand a bit more how we get tired, and mostly it's going to come from running and combat. They're the main two things you do in a battle, right? So coming back to our question, should we walk or should we run? Well, walking will give us -1 fatigue. So that's going to be -10 fatigue per second over a minute. That's -600 fatigue. That's giving us our fatigue back. That's good, at least in relation to our question of should we walk or run at the start of a battle. So basically, walking will prevent you from losing any fatigue, and that's very helpful at the start of a battle when your units are on 0 fatigue and fresh. You can keep them that way if you're walking, even if you're going up the steepest hill in the world. So you can definitely save yourself a few thousand points of fatigue if you walk to the battle rather than running right at the start. And no, that's not going to be a huge game changer to save yourself a few thousand points of fatigue, but if you are someone that likes to try and take every little advantage possible to ensure your victory, then this is an easy one to do. And remember that it's delaying the onset of those big fatigue penalties from exhaustion. And that just equates to killing more and dying less for your units, even if only a little bit. So walking at the start of a battle is a good idea to prevent fatigue loss. However, -600 fatigue recovery from 1 minute of walking is basically nothing when you remember that the range of fatigue is up to 30,000. And it would only take you 15 seconds of running to use up that 600 fatigue. What's more, being idle or standing still will recover 18 fatigue per tick, so that's 180 per second, meaning minus 10,800 over a minute. So that means that in terms of recovering fatigue, standing still is going to do it 17 times faster than walking. So from this we can learn that if you want to recover fatigue from your already tired units, walking is pointless. You're going to be better off just stood still for a minute and then running to your destination. So there we go, a very long-winded way of saying walking is less tiring than running. Who the fuck knew, eh? We do also have to remember that there's going to be variables as well. You shouldn't really walk your army up to the enemy army if you're under heavy artillery or missile or magic fire, because the damage you're going to take probably isn't worth the fatigue you're going to save. So it really depends on the army and sometimes the faction and whether it's going to be a good idea or not. Or, don't know why I went Australian there. I'm going to do the rest of this fucking video in Australian, alright, you fucking wallabies? Legend Total War here, and today we're going to fuck up wallaby. So yeah, not a good idea to walk if you're taking damage from any source. And this whole pre-battle walking or running situation can be one we can take advantage of if we can make the enemy run to us, especially if it's up a hill. If we can stay put and save our fatigue and make them waste a few thousand of theirs, that's just one of those little advantages to help our cause. Except, as you can see here, the AI is actually having the good sense to walk up this hill rather than run up it, so we're going to need to give them some gentle persuasion to make them run. Or maybe the enemy is on the defensive and they're not coming down from their side of the hill either, and again, they're going to need some gentle encouragement. Artillery is a great way to do this. Magic can also be a good way to do this. Just do some damage to the enemy army and it will typically make them run after you. And with this, they will of course be wasting their fatigue, especially running up hills. And as we'll see, by the time the enemy gets to us, they're going to be in winded, maybe active states. You see these Chaos Great Weapons, they're winded, so they're suffering some fatigue penalties before they've even reached the battle. These Marauders are active, so they're not too bad, but whether you have to walk up to the enemy army or make them run to you, there's some ways we can control fatigue to our advantage. In campaign, there's a few fatigue things to think about, such as force march stance. As I'm sure many of you will know, this will make your entire army start the battle tired, which, if we go back to this, means we're starting at about 12,600 fatigue, so about halfway to being exhausted. As an example of the effects of this, here I am sat in a settlement with an Arbol army about to come and attack me. And we can see when it does, it's a Pyrrhic victory, so that's fine, but we're going to lose 4 of our units from the army and take a load of damage, of course. And if we take that auto-resolve, by the end of it, we're going to lose 737 good solid men. Now we're going to reload that save and set up the same thing again, except this time we're going to put ourselves in force march, and we'll see what difference it makes to that auto-resolve with our entire army being tired. Well, it's still a Pyrrhic victory, so not a huge difference, but we are going to lose 5 units instead of 4 this time, and where last time we lost 737, now we've lost 894. So overall, not a huge difference, it's maybe like 10% difference, but still, that 10% could be enough to decide a victory or a defeat. So don't underestimate that downside of force march. And similarly, if you use Lightning Strike, this is also going to put you in a state of reduced vigor, which is very tired, so not far off exhaustion at all. And with my Greenskins army here, even though I don't really benefit from Lightning Strike in this battle, you can see after a few seconds of walking, my Crimson Killers here are exhausted, my other units are very tired, so you tend to start pretty messed up. Just remember all those big exhaustion fatigue penalties that will come your way from this. And we can see the Crimson Killer stat effects here, starting with armor, which is down by 34, because as we all know, armor stops working once you get tired. Down by 4 speed, they're going to be down that 6 leadership as well. 16 melee attack off, that's pretty huge. 6 melee defense and 16 charge bonus. So some pretty big losses. Their stats still look pretty good though, because their stats are nuts anyway, but it's just good to be aware of these little campaign things that are going to push your units into exhaustion much sooner. Another thing to be wary of, usually in campaigns, is ladders in sieges. As I'm sure many of you know, ladders will wear your units out like a bastard. By the time they've all got to the top of it, the unit is going to be exhausted if they've got to fight somebody at the top of the ladder, but if they don't, then they'll likely only be tired because some of the boys get to rest when they're at the top of the ladder while the others are climbing up. So if you can let them rest a bit when everyone's up the ladder, it's a good idea. And another good idea, keeping your units alive so that they can gain rank, because there's actually a really nice perk a unit will get when it reaches rank 9, and that is Infinite Run. That's right, your unit will not get tired in the slightest. Not a single point of fatigue will be accrued from any amount of running, even up the steepest hills in the world. This is because rank 9 units get a kind of universal -4 fatigue on every fatigue-causing action. And if you remember that running costs 4 fatigue per tick, then obviously -4 is going to make it 0 fatigue per tick. And there's still some benefits for lower ranks. When you hit rank 3, which is 3 bronze chevrons, you'll get -1 fatigue. At rank 5 or 2 silver chevrons, you'll get -2 fatigue. At rank 7 or a single gold chevron, you'll get -3 fatigue. And of course, rank 9, -4 fatigue. So even the lower ranks are still going to benefit. They don't quite have the infinite run, but they will get less tired from running. And yes, this also means they'll last longer in combat before they get exhausted as well. So that just means more damage output and survivability, the higher your tier of unit. And it also means that if you have an army of rank 9 units, ignore everything I said at the start of this video about walking your army. It doesn't matter, just run them because they got infinite run. Nice! It's also important to understand how speed plays into all this, because fatigue is the same for every unit, no matter their type. Whether you're infantry, cavalry, monster, 1 minute of running for any units of the same rank is going to cause the same amount of fatigue. The difference is in the amount of distance they can cover, which means faster units are going to be less likely to be bothered by run fatigue. And in the case of the Forsaken here, you can see they've reached their destination. They can now rest. The Chaos Marauders and Chaos Warriors are way behind. They're still both winded though, as the Forsaken were, but now the Forsaken get to rest and can get themselves back to fresh. So you can avoid a bit of run fatigue if your units are faster, whether that be more faster-paced infantry like Forsaken, cavalry monsters, monstrous infantry, whatever. If your army is comprised of more speedy, fast units, you will have this slight advantage of not really being affected so much by run fatigue. But what's important to take from this is the opposite end of the spectrum. If your army is very slow, let's say it's a lot of heavy armor, like Chaos Warriors or Dwarfs, these kind of heavy, slow armies do have to be careful of their run fatigue, because if they do run all the way up to the enemy, if that's a fair distance away, they are going to get winded or maybe into tired before they've even reached the battle. So be careful if you've got an army of slow, chunky boys. And if you can take a second to rest your boys, why not do it? If they're winded from all the running, just let them stand there for a second like these Chosen. They're not needed in the battle right now, so I can let them come back to fresh, and then I'll send them in. What's more, if you do send units in late, they're going to be fresh, and the enemy they're going to fight has probably been fighting for a little bit, so they might be a little bit tired. Like these Tomb Guard, they're diminished, which means tired, so that's only going to serve to make the Chosen a little bit more effective. And hell, if you wanted to get technical and tactical, you could now cycle the Plague Bearers out, let them rest, have the Chosen take over the fight, and then switch them back around again when the Chosen get tired. Not a tactic I've really tried, but it sounds like it would work okay. Just depends whether it's worth the hassle. Now then, let's talk about the bold statement, Perfect Vigor is the strongest ability in the game. When you read the tooltip for it, it says this unit never loses vigor. So that sounds pretty simple and easy to understand, right? They just never get tired of anything. That's cool. But what does that really mean? Have you ever thought about it? Let's do a little test first of all with local sexy man Prince Sigvold the Magnificent. He's a man who's obviously had many years of rampant sexing and thus has developed perfect vigor. He does not suffer any kind of fatigue. Let's put him up against equally sexy Grimgor Ironhide, who unfortunately for him hasn't got perfect vigor, so will get tired. What we're going to do is pit these two against each other twice. But in this first fight right in front of you here, Grimgor is exhausted. I've been running him around before he's run into this fight with Sigvold, so he's going to be suffering from those fatigue penalties. And I'm going to use both of their abilities as optimally as I can in both fights. This other fight though, Grimgor is coming in from fresh, so meeting Sigvold in a straight fair 1v1. And how do these two fights play out? Well, after a minute or so of fighting, the fresh on fresh fair fight is looking pretty bleak for Sigvold. He's lost most of his health. He's nearly done for. Whereas the fight with exhausted Grimgor is going okay for Sigvold. And after another minute or so, the fair fight has come to an end. Sigvold is off. He got about a third of Grimgor's health off. Sigvold able to hang in there even when he was on that low health because of his regeneration most likely, and the fact that Grimgor was starting to suffer fatigue. He's very tired here, so those penalties starting to stack up on him. But we can see Sigvold has no chance against fresh Grimgor. Well, what about against exhausted Grimgor? Well, Sigvold wins. Pretty damn comfortably as well. He's still got more than half his health, and we've got pretty much the opposite result from the other fight. And this is owed pretty much entirely to perfect vigor. So while Grimgor was suffering all of these exhausted afflictions, Sigvold never was. So in essence, this was happening. It's almost like perfect vigor gives a unit these buffs that they would normally suffer, obviously gradually. And when you think about it like that, it's easy to see why Perfect Vigor is the strongest ability in the game. Show me another ability, spell, or item that does all of this. for a unit, and it lasts the entire battle. Most spells or activatable abilities only last like a minute or so. This lasts 5, 10, 15 minutes, however long your battle is. But now you could make the argument that someone like Sigvald, who always has perfect vigor and there's no way to take it off him, is never really ever going to suffer those penalties, so it doesn't really mean that for him, because that's just always his performance. And the same for all the other units in the game that have perfect vigor, like Bretonnian Cavalry, for example, the Grail Knights, the Pegasus Knights, the Hippogriffs, they've all got perfect vigor. The Centaurs for the Beastmen have the Rowdy trait, that has perfect vigor in it. A few Lizardmen units have it, including the Blessed Saurus Warriors. These are definitely a good pick because they have that perfect vigor if you can take them in a campaign. So those units always maintain their stats. But what about units that we can apply this kind of buff to? Nikai has the Golden Tributes ability from his item, which isn't technically perfect vigor, but it does the same thing. It removes 1% of fatigue every second, so with our 30,000 fatigue points, 1% of that is 300, so it's removing 300 fatigue per second, and if we remember that the most we're going to expend is 190 per second in combat, well, this ability is always going to keep Nikai in fresh and any units that stick by him, or it could quickly recover any units that have suffered some fatigue, so it's an incredibly powerful ability that is in essence giving units these crazy buffs for the entirety of a battle. So keep an eye out for Perfect Vigor wherever you may find it. In campaign, here for the vampire counts, you can get it for your skeletons in the tech tree. Well, you might say, they're skeletons, what are they going to do anyway? Well, how about for the Chosen in the Warriors of Chaos tech tree? Would you like some Chosen with all of these buffs strapped onto them? I'd imagine you would. Ikit can also get Perfect Vigor for his characters on Doom Wheels, courtesy of the Forbidden Workshop. The dwarves can make this item, Iron Warden's Hammer. This has an ability which gives perfect vigor. That's a pretty easy one to obtain. But what if I told you that any lord can easily get perfect vigor in campaign? Witness my glorious Grimgor with perfect vigor, essentially giving him all those tasty buffs that he will no longer ever suffer. He will never have to fear Prince Sigvald ever again. And how did he do it? Seasoned Campaigner. This is a trait that can be gained by simply fighting multiple battles very far away from the capital. That's it. I'm not sure of the details, in all honesty. I don't know how far very far away is, but just jump yourself in a sea lane, go somewhere, fight some battles, and come back with perfect vigor. Lovely. There's also some spells and abilities throughout the game that can give you a similar kind of effect. For example, for Kislev, Daz's Song of Winter Sunlight. This is on Kostalton and on Patriarchs, removes 100% of vigor per second for 10 seconds. So when you see some of your units are into exhausted, you can run over to them, smash this little button, boop, and then what do you know, your previously exhausted units are now fresh again, and in essence, we have just done all of this for them. And that is, of course, going to make your units kill more with that melee attack especially, and die less with the extra armor and melee defense, at least for a couple of minutes until they get exhausted again. Some others can have a similar effect, but maybe not quite as powerful, like the Regrowth spell from the Lore of Life. This not only heals a unit, but also takes away 1% of their fatigue per second, and I think the spell lasts like 26 seconds, so it's going to save you a nice chunk of fatigue, or if you use it on a unit when they're still healthy, like here, it's going to save the models from dying for one thing because of the healing, but it's also going to keep them in fresh or active for longer, which means they're going to stave off all the fatigue penalties, at least just a little bit, and that's ultimately going to give you killing more and dying less for your boys. You could also use it to kind of recover a unit's fatigue. If you pull them out of combat, let them stand still and heal up that way. If you drop this on them, they're going to get the heals, but it's also going to bring them out of exhausted. You can see they're into very tired now, and by the end of the spell, they're going to be in tired, and if you leave them stood there a little bit longer, they'll get back to fresh within maybe a minute, minute and a half at a guess, whereas it would normally take just under 3 minutes if they only stood still. So again, it's only a small thing, but if you can do this for one of your stronger, more dangerous units, it could give them a nice performance boost. And we can kind of inflict the opposite on our enemies. Nikai, for example, has the Miasma of Despair. This will add on 1% of vigor per second for the enemy, so that's going to make them more tired more quickly, get them exhausted quicker, and suffer those penalties. And there's a bunch of these throughout the game. Here's a Skaven spell, Brittle Bone. This adds on 1% for a pretty chunky 39 seconds, so that's going to add on a lot of fatigue to enemy units, making them die more and hurt you less. So keep an eye out for spells, abilities, items that affect vigor or fatigue. If it adds it on to the enemy, great. If it takes it off your boys, great. And there we go. With all that, I hope you have a better understanding of fatigue. And if you're thinking, wow, should I really be worried about fatigue in my battles? Probably not. It's a thing, but it's not a huge thing because both sides suffer it equally. So it's kind of cancelling itself out for both sides, right? But understand there are some advantages to be had by trying to control fatigue or manipulating fatigue to your advantage, and maybe if you only do one little thing to try and help fatigue, it's not going to make that much of a difference. But if you do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them throughout a battle, well then those are going to add up to have quite the impact on your battle. And most importantly from this video, you now have an excuse as to why you just left one of your units standing around doing nothing during the battle. It's because they were having a tactical recovery after they routed, alright? I was just letting them get some of their vigor back, alright? Shut up, Phil! I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, do consider channel memberships. You can get early access to videos and some exclusive videos. Or there's Patreon if you want to get a little bit more personal with me and get some saucy beard pics. Then do check that out. Otherwise, I will see you in the future.